There is a particular kind of tiredness that sleep does not cure. The body lies still, heavy against the mattress, muscles relaxed after the long effort of the day. The room is dark, quiet enough that even small sounds feel amplified. Nothing is required anymore. No messages need answering. No tasks remain unfinished, at least not for now. And yet the mind continues. Thoughts drift in without invitation. Memories replay themselves with strange clarity. Conversations resurface, not as they were but as they might have been. Futures appear fully formed, carrying worry, hope, or regret in equal measure. This moment is familiar to almost everyone. It is the moment when distraction ends. During the day, the world keeps us occupied. Noise fills every gap, screens glow, schedules press forward. There is always something to respond to, something to check, something to do next. In that movement, the deeper questions stay quiet, waiting patiently. Night removes the noise. And when it does, something ancient wakes up inside us. Questions we did not ask during the day begin to form on their own. Why does this bother me so much? Why do I feel restless even when nothing is wrong? Why does peace feel temporary, while worry feels endless? These are not dramatic questions. They are not philosophical in the way textbooks present philosophy. They are personal, intimate, and often wordless. They are felt more than spoken. Philosophy, in its earliest form, was born exactly here. Not in classrooms, not in debates, but in quiet moments when the human mind turned inward and found itself unable to rest. Long before philosophy became an academic discipline, it was simply an attempt to understand how to live without being constantly disturbed by life. Human beings have always struggled with the same inner tension. We want stability in a world that changes. We want certainty in a life that offers none. We want control over things that move according to their own logic. This tension does not disappear with progress. It only changes its shape. Ancient people worried about survival, honor, and fate. Modern people worry about meaning, identity, and direction. Different words, same unease. At night, when the mind is no longer occupied with appearances, this unease becomes visible. We lie awake not because we lack sleep, but because we lack resolution. Not resolution to specific problems, but to a deeper uncertainty about how to exist peacefully in a world that refuses to stay still. Philosophy begins when this uncertainty is no longer ignored. There is a common misunderstanding about philosophy. Many believe philosophy is about intelligence, about clever arguments, complex theories, or abstract ideas removed from daily life. In reality, philosophy began as something far more practical. It began as survival for the mind. Ancient thinkers were not trying to sound profound. They were trying to remain sane. They lived in times of war, disease, exile, and loss. Death was not distant or theoretical. It was present, visible, unavoidable. Comfort was limited. Control was rare. And yet, even then, people noticed something strange. Some individuals remained calm, even in chaos. Some endured loss without collapsing. Some faced uncertainty without panic. The question that followed was simple but powerful. What do these people understand that others do not? Philosophy emerged as an attempt to answer that question. The mind's refusal to rest at night is not a flaw. It is a signal. It signals that something remains unresolved, not externally, but internally. During the day, we manage life by reacting. At night, reaction is no longer possible. The mind, freed from immediate demands, begins to process existence itself. This is why nighttime thinking often feels circular. The mind is not trying to solve a problem. It is trying to make sense of living. Why do certain things hurt more than others? Why do we fear loss, even when we know it is inevitable? Why do we struggle so deeply with things beyond our control? These are philosophical questions, even if we never label them as such. There is another reason the mind stays awake at night. During the day, we identify ourselves through action. What we do, what we achieve, what others see. At night, those identities fade. You are no longer your role, your title, or your productivity. You are simply a consciousness aware of itself. And in that stripped-down state, many of the stories we tell ourselves begin to feel fragile. Who am I when I am not doing anything? What remains when there is nothing to distract me? These questions are unsettling because they touch something fundamental. Philosophy does not rush to answer them. It teaches us how to sit with them without fear. Throughout history, different philosophical traditions approached this restlessness in different ways. Some emphasized discipline and inner strength. Others emphasized surrender and harmony. Some focused on reason, others on intuition. But all of them began from the same recognition. Life will not bend to human desire. Once this is accepted, the question changes. Instead of asking how to control life, philosophy asks how to relate to it. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. At night, the mind often resists this shift. It searches for certainty. If only I understood this one thing. If only I made the right decision. If only I figured life out. But philosophy, especially ancient philosophy, does not promise certainty. It offers clarity. Clarity about what can be changed. Clarity about what cannot. Clarity about where peace actually comes from. This clarity does not arrive suddenly. It unfolds slowly, like the night itself. There is something important to notice about nighttime thoughts. They are rarely urgent. Even when they feel intense, they are not asking for immediate action. They are asking for understanding. The mind is not demanding solutions. It is asking for perspective. Philosophy exists to provide that perspective. Not by silencing the mind, but by guiding it. Imagine early humans sitting beside a fire after a long day. The work is done. The danger has passed, at least for now. The body rests, but the mind wanders. They look at the sky, at stars that do not move according to human will. They notice how life continues whether they understand it or not. They ask questions without expecting final answers. What is a good life? How should one face loss? What does it mean to live well, knowing everything ends? These questions did not require writing. They required reflection. Philosophy grew from these reflections. One of the most important insights philosophy offers is this. Restlessness is not always something to eliminate. Sometimes it is something to listen to. The mind stays awake at night not because it is broken, but because it is honest. It refuses to be satisfied with surface-level explanations. It senses that beneath daily concerns lies something deeper, something unresolved. Philosophy gives language to this sensing. Modern life often treats nighttime restlessness as a problem to fix. We look for distractions, substances, noise, or constant stimulation to drown it out, and sometimes this works temporarily. But philosophy suggests another approach. What if the restlessness is an invitation? An invitation to look more closely at how we live, what we value, and where we place our peace. Not tonight, perhaps. Not all at once. But slowly. This book is not meant to answer every question that arises in the dark. It is meant to accompany them. Like a quiet voice, not insisting, not persuading, but reflecting. In the chapters that follow, we will explore different philosophical ways of meeting life. Not as systems to memorize, but as lenses through which the mind can rest. We will move through ancient ideas not to escape modern life, but to understand it more clearly. And we will do so slowly. Because philosophy, like sleep, cannot be forced. It arrives when resistance fades. For now, it is enough to recognize this. You are not alone in your nighttime thoughts. You never have been. Human beings have always lain awake, wondering how to live without being torn apart by life. Philosophy began as their answer. And perhaps, in time, it can become yours too. When the light fades and the world grows quiet, the mind does something it rarely has time to do during the day. It turns inward. Not deliberately. Not methodically. It simply drifts. In this drifting, certain questions surface again and again across cultures, centuries, and lives. They are not taught. They are remembered. They rise naturally when distraction falls away. These questions do not belong to any one era. They appeared long before books existed and continue to appear even now, when information is endless. They emerge because they are woven into the human condition. One of the first questions humans ask in the dark is about suffering. Why does it exist? Why does it seem unavoidable? Why does it touch some lives more harshly than others? This question is ancient. Early humans watched illness strike without warning. They watched children die young. They watched crops fail despite effort and prayer. There was no illusion that life was fair or predictable. Yet suffering was not only physical. There was grief, fear, longing. There was the pain of loss and the anxiety of not knowing what came next. Even now, when many physical dangers have been reduced, this question remains. Suffering has simply changed form. We suffer from uncertainty, from comparison, from meaninglessness. At night, when the mind is no longer busy managing appearances, suffering reveals itself honestly. It is not always dramatic. Often, it is quiet and persistent, like a low hum beneath consciousness. Why does this feel so heavy? Why does it linger? Philosophy began when humans stopped accepting suffering as mere fate and started asking what it meant. Another question that appears in the dark is about control. What can I actually influence? What lies beyond me, no matter how hard I try? During the day, control feels possible. We plan, decide, act, and adjust. There is movement, and movement creates the feeling of agency. At night, that illusion weakens. Plans feel fragile. Decisions feel uncertain. The future feels large and undefined. The mind begins to notice how much of life unfolds without consultation. We do not choose when we are born. We do not choose our parents. We do not choose the time we live in. Even many of our thoughts arrive without invitation. This realization can feel unsettling. If so much is outside my control, what am I responsible for? What am I meant to do? Ancient thinkers sat with this question not to eliminate uncertainty, but to understand how to live within it. Closely tied to control is the question of fairness. Why do good things happen to bad people? Why do bad things happen to good people? This question has echoed across time with remarkable consistency. Children ask it instinctively. Adults ask it quietly. At night, memories surface of moments that felt unjust, effort that went unrewarded, kindness that was not returned, pain that seemed undeserved. Fairness feels deeply important to the human mind, yet life does not appear to honor it consistently. This tension creates inner conflict. If life is unfair, how should one live? Should one become bitter, detached, or indifferent? Philosophy emerged as a way to explore this tension without collapsing into despair. Another question humans ask in the dark concerns identity. Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I beyond my roles, titles, and routines? During the day, identity is reinforced constantly. We are named by what we do. We are recognized through function and contribution. At night, these identities loosen. You are no longer your job, no longer your responsibilities, no longer your performance. You are simply a conscious being aware of existence. This can feel unsettling, even frightening. Without roles, what remains? Is there something essential beneath all this activity? Ancient philosophy did not rush to define identity. It approached it cautiously, knowing how easily humans confuse who they are with what they possess or produce. This confusion, philosophers noticed, is a major source of suffering. There is also the question of time. Why does it move so quickly? Why does the past feel heavy while the future feels uncertain? At night, time behaves strangely. Moments stretch. Memories feel vivid. The future appears closer than it actually is. The mind revisits earlier versions of the self. Who I was. Who I thought I would become. Sometimes there is nostalgia. Sometimes regret. Time forces a confrontation with impermanence. Nothing stays. Everything changes. This realization can create sadness, but it can also create clarity. If everything changes, what truly matters? Philosophy was born from this confrontation. Perhaps the deepest question humans ask in the dark is about meaning. What is all this for? Is there a point to suffering, effort, and loss? This question does not always appear as words. Often, it appears as a feeling, a sense that something is missing, even when life appears full. Ancient humans did not have easy answers. They lived close to death and mystery. They knew that certainty was rare. Yet instead of turning away from this question, they turned toward it. They understood something important. Meaning is not something that can be forced. It emerges through understanding. Philosophy became a way to approach meaning without pretending it was simple or guaranteed. It is important to notice something about these questions. They do not demand immediate answers. They are not problems to be solved like equations. They are conditions of being human. Trying to eliminate them entirely often creates more suffering. Philosophy does not aim to silence these questions. It aims to help us live with them. Nighttime questioning is often misunderstood as anxiety. Sometimes it is, but often it is something deeper. It is the mind noticing reality without filters. During the day, we manage life. At night, we contemplate it. This contemplation is not a weakness, it is a capacity. It is what allowed ancient humans to develop wisdom, not just tools. Across cultures, philosophers noticed that the way people related to these questions shaped their lives more than the answers themselves. Some became rigid, clinging to certainty. Some became nihilistic, rejecting meaning altogether. Some became reflective, learning how to exist without absolute answers. It was this third path that philosophy explored most deeply. The questions humans ask in the dark are not signs that something is wrong. They are signs that something important is happening. They signal awareness. Awareness that life is fragile. Awareness that control is limited. Awareness that meaning is not obvious. Philosophy does not remove this awareness. It refines it. As you move through this book, these questions will return in different forms. They will be approached from different perspectives. They will be answered partially, and sometimes not at all. That is intentional. Because philosophy is not meant to replace the night with certainty. It is meant to sit beside you in the dark, quietly, as these questions unfold. Before philosophy became something written in heavy books, before it was divided into schools and arguments, before it demanded explanations and footnotes, it was something much simpler. It was a way of sitting with life. Not a profession. Not a subject. Not an identity. It was a response to being alive. The earliest philosophers did not think of themselves as philosophers. They did not set out to build systems or impress others with intelligence. They were people who noticed that living without reflection led to confusion, fear, and unnecessary suffering. They noticed that the mind, left unguided, tends to chase what harms it and fear what cannot be avoided. Philosophy began as a form of inner guidance. In its earliest form, philosophy was not about knowledge, it was about orientation. How should one face uncertainty? How should one live knowing that everything changes? How should one respond to pain without being broken by it? These were not abstract puzzles, they were daily concerns. People asked these questions because life forced them to. War arrived without warning. Illness appeared without reason. Death visited homes without invitation. There was no illusion that life was predictable or fair. Philosophy did not promise control over these things. It promised clarity about how to stand in their presence. What made philosophy different from myth or religion was not belief, but observation. Early philosophers watched human behavior closely. They noticed patterns. They saw how desire often led to disappointment, how fear amplified suffering, how clinging created anxiety. They also noticed something hopeful. Some people suffered less, not because they were luckier, but because they related to life differently. This difference became the starting point of philosophy. Philosophy, in its original sense, was not about finding the truth of the universe. It was about finding a way to live without being constantly disturbed. It asked practical questions. What thoughts calm the mind? What beliefs create unnecessary pain? What attitudes allow a person to endure loss without despair? These questions were tested not in theory, but in life. If an idea did not bring steadiness, it was abandoned. If it brought clarity, it was kept. This is why ancient philosophy was often taught through dialogue, stories, and short reflections, rather than long explanations. It was meant to be remembered in moments of distress. A sentence recalled during grief. A metaphor remembered during fear. A question resurfacing during restlessness. Philosophy was meant to live inside the mind, not sit on a shelf. Over time, philosophy slowly changed. As societies grew more complex, philosophy became something to analyze rather than something to live. It moved from marketplaces and quiet conversations into institutions. This shift brought precision, but it also brought distance. Philosophy became something people studied instead of something they practiced. Arguments replaced reflection. Definitions replaced insight. Winning debates replaced understanding life. Something essential was lost in this transition. But the original spirit of philosophy never disappeared. It continued quietly, wherever people reflected deeply on their experience. In journals written late at night. In conversations between friends. In moments of solitude after loss. Every time someone asked, "How should I live?" philosophy was happening again. True philosophy does not begin with answers. It begins with attention. Attention to thought. Attention to emotion. Attention to how the mind reacts to events. Ancient thinkers believed that most suffering came not from events themselves, but from unexamined reactions. Philosophy trained people to notice these reactions without immediately obeying them. This training required patience. Not effortful patience, but honest patience. One of the most important things ancient philosophy taught was that the mind can be shaped. Not controlled completely. Not silenced forever. But guided. Left alone, the mind tends to exaggerate danger, cling to comfort, and resist change. Philosophy did not judge this tendency. It worked with it. It offered practices, reflections, and perspectives that slowly changed how the mind interpreted reality. This is why ancient philosophy was inseparable from daily life. It was practiced when waking up. It was practiced while working. It was practiced before sleep. It did not wait for special occasions. Life itself was the classroom. Another important aspect of early philosophy was humility. Philosophers did not claim to possess ultimate truth. They knew how limited human understanding was. They approached life with curiosity rather than certainty. This humility protected them from dogmatism. They were more interested in asking better questions than in defending rigid answers. Philosophy, at its core, was never meant to remove mystery. It was meant to help humans live peacefully alongside it. Ancient thinkers accepted that some things would always remain unknown. Instead of fighting this, they asked how to remain steady despite it. This is why philosophy feels most natural at night. When the world quiets, the mind returns to its essential questions. Philosophy does not rush to resolve them. It keeps them company. As this book unfolds, philosophy will not be presented as something to master. It will be offered as something to return to. A way of seeing. A way of relating. A way of resting within life rather than fighting it. In the next chapter, we will explore why ancient thinkers spoke so often in simplicity, metaphors, and paradox, and why clarity for them mattered more than complexity. For now, it is enough to remember this. Philosophy began not as knowledge, but as care for the mind. And that need has never disappeared. Every human life, no matter how protected or privileged, eventually meets suffering. It may arrive early or late. It may come loudly or quietly. But it arrives. This fact has never changed. What has changed across time and culture is how humans interpret suffering, whether they see it as punishment, failure, injustice, randomness, or simply a condition of being alive. Philosophy did not begin by asking how to eliminate suffering. It began by asking how to understand it. Because long before suffering could be reduced, it had to be faced. One of the most difficult realizations for the human mind is this: much of what shapes our lives lies outside our control. We do not choose the bodies we are born into. We do not choose the era we live in. We do not choose when illness appears, when loss arrives, or when change disrupts what felt stable. During the day, this reality is easier to ignore. Action creates the feeling of control. Decisions, schedules, and responsibilities give structure to life. We move forward believing that effort guarantees outcomes. At night, this illusion weakens. The mind notices how fragile plans are, how unpredictable people can be, how easily circumstances shift. This recognition is unsettling, but it is also honest. Philosophy begins where honesty replaces comfort. Ancient thinkers noticed something important. Suffering does not arise only from pain itself. It arises from the relationship we have with pain. Two people can experience the same loss and suffer differently. Two people can face the same uncertainty and respond in opposite ways. This observation led philosophers away from blaming life and toward examining the mind. What beliefs intensify suffering? What expectations make pain unbearable? What illusions about control create constant anxiety? These questions became central. Control, philosophers realized, is both necessary and dangerous. Without some sense of agency, life feels meaningless. But when the desire for control expands beyond its limits, suffering multiplies. Humans often attempt to control outcomes, other people, time, and even chance itself. When these attempts fail, frustration turns inward. Why couldn't I stop this? Why didn't I see it coming? Why wasn't I enough? Philosophy noticed how quickly the desire for control turns into self-blame. Ancient thinkers did not shame this impulse. They understood it. The mind seeks stability. Control feels like safety. But philosophy asked whether this strategy truly worked. Inner peace, as philosophers described it, was not a permanent emotional state. It was not happiness in the modern sense. It was steadiness. The ability to remain present without being overwhelmed. The ability to feel pain without being consumed by it. The ability to act without clinging to results. Inner peace did not mean life became gentle. It meant the mind stopped fighting what could not be changed. This distinction is subtle, but it transforms experience. Suffering often intensifies when the mind confuses influence with control. You can influence your actions, but not their outcomes. You can influence relationships, but not other people's choices. You can influence preparation, but not fate. Philosophy taught that peace begins when this confusion is resolved. Not by withdrawing from life, but by engaging with it more wisely. Another source of suffering philosophers observed was attachment. Attachment to outcomes. Attachment to identity. Attachment to permanence. Humans naturally cling to what brings comfort and resist what threatens it. This is not a flaw, it is instinct. But instinct, left unexamined, can dominate the mind. When identity becomes attached to roles, loss feels like annihilation. When happiness becomes attached to outcomes, uncertainty feels unbearable. When peace becomes attached to stability, change feels like danger. Philosophy gently loosens these attachments. Not by demanding detachment, but by restoring perspective. Perspective is one of philosophy's quiet gifts. It does not remove pain, but it places it within a larger frame. Ancient thinkers often reminded themselves of time. How brief a single life is. How many generations have lived and passed. How many others have faced similar suffering. This was not meant to diminish individual pain. It was meant to prevent it from becoming all-encompassing. Suffering shrinks when it is no longer the center of existence. Another insight philosophy offered was that resistance amplifies suffering. Pain is often unavoidable. Struggle is often optional. When the mind demands that reality be different, tension grows. When it accepts reality as it is, energy returns. This acceptance is not surrender. It is clarity. It allows action without desperation. The search for inner peace is not the search for comfort. It is the search for alignment. Alignment between expectations and reality. Alignment between effort and acceptance. Alignment between action and limitation. Philosophy taught that inner peace arises when these alignments are restored. Not suddenly, not permanently, but gradually through reflection. At night, when suffering feels close and control feels distant, philosophy becomes most relevant. Not as a solution, but as a companion. It reminds the mind that it is not failing because it cannot control everything. It is simply human. It reminds the mind that peace does not come from dominating life, but from understanding it. This chapter does not resolve suffering. No chapter could. But it reframes it. Suffering is not evidence that something has gone wrong. It is evidence that life is being lived. Philosophy does not promise escape. It offers orientation. When ancient thinkers first began to speak about how to live, they did not start by imagining a perfect world. They started by looking honestly at the one they were in. Life, they observed, is uncertain. It changes without warning. It does not arrange itself around human hopes. The Stoics did not see this as a flaw in existence. They saw it as its nature. To understand Stoicism, one must begin here, with realism rather than optimism, with clarity rather than comfort. Stoicism is often misunderstood as a philosophy of emotional hardness. In truth, it is a philosophy of emotional honesty. It does not deny feeling. It denies illusion. The Stoics believed that life follows its own order, an order far larger than any individual. Nature moves according to causes and effects that do not pause to consider human preference. Seasons change, bodies age, empires rise and fall. Human beings, however, tend to forget this. We live as if stability were guaranteed, as if plans were promises, as if effort ensured outcomes. Stoicism enters as a correction to this quiet misunderstanding. It does not tell us to expect the worst. It tells us to expect reality. According to the Stoics, much of human suffering comes from mistaking how the world works. We believe events should follow fairness. We believe people should behave reasonably. We believe life should reward virtue consistently. When these beliefs collide with reality, disappointment arises. Stoicism does not accuse us of weakness for feeling disappointed. It simply points out that disappointment often comes from false expectations. If one expects permanence in a changing world, distress is inevitable. The Stoics viewed human nature as deeply rational, but also deeply vulnerable to error. The mind has great capacity for understanding, yet it is easily led astray by fear, desire, and habit. Left unexamined, it reacts automatically, interpreting events in ways that intensify suffering. A harsh word becomes an insult. A setback becomes a failure. A loss becomes a catastrophe. Stoicism teaches that these interpretations are not facts, they are judgments. And judgments can be examined. This is one of the most important Stoic insights. Events themselves do not disturb us. Our judgments about them do. This does not mean events are harmless. Pain is real. Loss is real. But the additional layer of suffering often comes from the stories we tell ourselves about what these events mean. Stoicism trains the mind to notice this process. When something happens, the Stoic pauses, not to suppress emotion, but to separate what occurred from what is being assumed. This pause creates space, and in that space, freedom appears. The Stoics believe that human beings are not powerless in the face of life, but they are not all-powerful either. They exist between these extremes. They cannot command the world, but they can govern themselves. This governance was not authoritarian, it was thoughtful. Stoicism taught people to direct their attention carefully, to choose responses rather than obey impulses, and to align their values with what is actually possible. To the Stoics, virtue was not moral perfection, it was coherence. To live virtuously meant to live in agreement with reality. This included accepting limitation, acknowledging impermanence, and acting with integrity regardless of outcome. A virtuous person was not someone who avoided suffering, but someone who did not allow suffering to distort their character. Stoicism also emphasized the social nature of human beings. Although it is often imagined as solitary, Stoicism did not promote withdrawal from life. It encouraged participation without attachment. Humans, the Stoics believed, are part of a larger whole. Their actions affect others. Their responsibilities extend beyond themselves. But this did not mean sacrificing inner peace for external approval. The Stoic aimed to act justly without needing recognition, to contribute without needing control. Another central Stoic idea was acceptance of fate. Not fate as blind destiny, but fate as the unfolding of causes beyond individual influence. Resisting this unfolding wastes energy. Aligning with it restores balance. This acceptance did not mean passivity. It meant choosing actions wisely while releasing the demand for specific outcomes. The Stoic acted fully, then let go. Human nature, according to Stoicism, is shaped by habit. The mind repeats what it practices. If it practices complaint, it becomes bitter. If it practices fear, it becomes anxious. If it practices reflection, it becomes calm. Stoicism was therefore practical. It focused on daily attention, daily reminders, daily discipline. Not to dominate the self, but to guide it. At night, the Stoic view of life becomes especially relevant. When activity stops, the mind reviews the day. It judges, regrets, worries. Stoicism offers a way to meet this process without being overwhelmed. It teaches that the day is finished. What could be done has been done. What could not be controlled was never yours. This understanding allows rest. Stoicism does not promise peace as an emotion. It promises peace as a posture, a way of standing within life. This posture is firm but not rigid, calm but not indifferent, engaged but not attached. It accepts human vulnerability without surrendering human dignity. There is a moment, often quiet and unnoticed, when frustration turns into exhaustion. It happens after effort has been spent, after worry has circled the same thoughts again and again, after the mind has tried every angle and found no relief. In that moment, something becomes clear. Much of what troubles us refuses to obey us. The Stoics noticed this long ago. They saw how human beings exhaust themselves trying to command outcomes, influence opinions, manage chance, and secure permanence in a world defined by change. They did not condemn this impulse. They understood it. The desire for control grows from the desire for safety. But Stoicism asked a precise and transformative question. What actually belongs to us? The Stoics drew a careful distinction, one that became the foundation of their entire philosophy. Some things are within our control. Some things are not. This distinction sounds simple, almost obvious. Yet when taken seriously, it reshapes how life is experienced. Within our control, the Stoics placed a small but powerful domain. Our judgments, our intentions, our choices, our responses. Outside our control lay everything else. Other people's actions, other people's opinions, the body's health, the outcome of efforts, time, chance, and death. Most suffering, the Stoics observed, comes from confusing these two domains. We attempt to control what is not ours. We neglect what is. Consider how often anxiety arises from this confusion. You worry about how someone will react. You replay conversations, imagining different outcomes. You fear future events that have not yet occurred. In each case, the mind is trying to manage something beyond its reach. Stoicism does not say this impulse is foolish. It says it is misplaced. Energy spent on what cannot be controlled is energy wasted. Energy spent on what can be controlled is transformative. This idea was not meant to shrink human ambition. It was meant to focus it. The Stoics did not believe humans were weak. They believed humans were powerful in the wrong places. They saw people invest enormous effort in chasing approval, securing certainty, and preventing change, while neglecting the one thing that truly shaped their lives, their character. Character, to the Stoics, was the only possession that could not be taken by force. It could not be stolen. It could not be destroyed by circumstance. It could not be diminished by loss. Everything else was temporary. Understanding this distinction changes how events are experienced. When something goes wrong, the Stoic does not immediately ask, "How do I fix this?" They first ask, "What part of this is mine?" If the answer lies within their choices or values, they act. If the answer lies outside their control, they accept. This acceptance is not resignation. It is clarity. It allows the mind to stop fighting what it cannot change and to direct attention where it matters. One of the most difficult aspects of this teaching is its honesty. It removes many comforting illusions. It removes the belief that effort guarantees success. It removes the belief that fairness governs outcomes. It removes the belief that life owes us understanding. But in removing these illusions, Stoicism offers something stronger. Stability. The Stoics understood that letting go of control does not feel peaceful at first. It feels like loss. The mind resists. It argues. It fears vulnerability. But slowly, as the distinction is practiced, something shifts. The mind becomes quieter. Not because problems disappear, but because unnecessary struggle does. This practice also changes how responsibility is understood. When everything feels like your responsibility, the weight becomes unbearable. When nothing feels like your responsibility, life becomes meaningless. Stoicism finds the balance. You are responsible for how you show up. You are not responsible for how the world responds. This balance allows effort without desperation. At night, this distinction becomes especially important. Many sleepless thoughts are attempts to control the uncontrollable. What if this happens? What if they think that? What if I chose wrong? Stoicism gently interrupts this cycle. It asks, is this thought about something you can influence right now? If not, it can be released. Not forced away. Not suppressed. Simply set down. The Stoics did not expect mastery overnight. They practiced this distinction daily, knowing the mind would forget. They reminded themselves again and again. This is not mine to carry. This belongs to nature. This response is mine to choose. Over time, these reminders reshaped experience. Control, as Stoicism reveals, is not about domination. It is about alignment. Alignment between effort and reality. Alignment between desire and limitation. Alignment between action and acceptance. When this alignment is found, inner peace begins to emerge. Not as constant calm, but as resilience. Expectation is one of the quietest forces shaping human suffering. It rarely announces itself. It hides inside hope, inside planning, inside the simple belief that things will continue as they are. We wake each day carrying invisible assumptions about how life should behave, how people should respond, how effort should be rewarded. Most of the time, these expectations go unnoticed until they are broken. Loss is often not painful only because something is gone. It is painful because it violates what we believed would remain. The Stoics understood this with unusual clarity. They saw that loss hurts twice, first through the event itself, and then through the shock of unmet expectation. Philosophy, they believed, could not always prevent the first pain, but it could soften the second. Expectation begins innocently. We expect the body to stay healthy. We expect relationships to remain stable. We expect work, once mastered, to stay secure. These expectations feel reasonable because they are familiar. The mind grows comfortable with patterns and mistakes familiarity for permanence. Stoicism enters precisely at this moment of misunderstanding. It reminds us that continuity is not a promise. It is a temporary arrangement. This reminder is not meant to darken life. It is meant to clarify it. The Stoics did not believe expectation itself was wrong. They believed unconscious expectation was dangerous. To expect something while forgetting its fragility is to build peace on unstable ground. This is why Stoic thinkers practiced remembering loss before it arrived. Not to live in fear, but to live in alignment with reality. They reminded themselves that what they loved could be taken, that what they had could change, that what felt solid was, in truth, temporary. This practice was not pessimism. It was preparation. Loss, when it comes, often feels unreal. The mind resists it. This cannot be happening. This should not be happening. This is not how it was supposed to go. These thoughts arise automatically. They are human. But the Stoics noticed that clinging to them prolonged suffering. The event has already occurred. Reality has already shifted. Resistance does not restore what was lost. It only delays acceptance. Stoicism does not ask us to like loss. It asks us to stop arguing with it. Acceptance in Stoic thought is one of the most misunderstood ideas. It is often confused with resignation or passivity. In truth, Stoic acceptance is active. It is the decision to see clearly. To accept something is not to approve of it. It is to acknowledge that it exists. Once acknowledged, action becomes possible. Without acceptance, the mind remains stuck, replaying what cannot be undone. The Stoics believed that grief itself was not a failure of philosophy. Grief was natural. Attachment was human. Pain was expected. What philosophy offered was not immunity to grief, but a way through it. A way to grieve without collapsing into despair. A way to mourn without losing oneself. They taught that love does not require denial of impermanence. In fact, love becomes more honest when impermanence is acknowledged. Expectation also shapes how we view ourselves. We expect ourselves to be consistent, to be strong, to improve steadily. When we fail to meet these expectations, disappointment turns inward. I should be better by now. I should not feel this way. I should have moved on. Stoicism challenges these assumptions gently. It reminds us that growth is uneven, that emotion is not linear, that being human includes regression, doubt, and pause. Self-acceptance in Stoic terms does not mean indulgence. It means realism. There is a quiet freedom in releasing expectation. Not all expectation, but the kind that demands guarantees. When expectations soften, gratitude sharpens. The Stoics noticed this paradox. When we stop assuming continuity, presence deepens. A moment becomes valuable because it is not promised. A relationship becomes precious because it is not permanent. Loss still hurts, but it no longer feels like betrayal. Stoicism did not grow in quiet comfort. It grew where life pressed hardest. Its ideas were not formed in isolation from the world, but shaped by people who lived at opposite ends of it. Some held power beyond imagination. Others possessed almost nothing. Many endured pain that could not be reasoned away. What connected them was not circumstance, but the same human struggle, how to remain whole when life refuses to be gentle. Power. Marcus Aurelius did not write philosophy as an emperor addressing the world. He wrote it as a man trying to survive responsibility. Each morning before the affairs of state began, he reminded himself of what the day would bring. Not praise and admiration, but resistance, pettiness, ingratitude, misunderstanding. He wrote that people would lie, complain, and act from ignorance, not because they were evil, but because they did not know better. This reminder was not cynical. It was protective. Power isolates. It tempts the mind into believing it is separate from others, above consequence, immune to nature. Marcus used Stoicism to counter this illusion. At night, after commanding armies and negotiating with rivals, he returned to the same truth. He was flesh, breath, and time like everyone else. His authority did not make him permanent. His status did not make him wise. Stoicism, for Marcus, was a way to prevent power from hollowing him out. Poverty. Epictetus began life owning nothing, not even himself. Born into slavery, his body belonged to another. His days were not his to plan. Pain was not theoretical, it was immediate. Yet Epictetus noticed something his captors did not. They could command his body, but not his judgment. They could punish him, but they could not decide what that punishment meant. This distinction became his freedom. When his leg was permanently injured, he did not curse fate. He observed it. The leg was damaged. That was a fact. Whether this damage defined him was not. Later, when he taught Stoicism, he did not speak like a man who had escaped hardship. He spoke like someone who had lived inside it and remained intact. For Epictetus, Stoicism was not dignity despite poverty. It was dignity independent of circumstance. Pain. There were Stoics whose names were never recorded. Parents who lost children. Soldiers who returned changed. Citizens who watched their homes disappear in fire or war. Their philosophy was not written, it was practiced. A mother who buried her son did not pretend the pain was acceptable. She allowed herself to grieve, but she did not let grief turn into rage against the universe. She remembered that life had never promised safety. A soldier who lived with injury did not ask why it happened to him. He asked how to live well now that it had. Pain did not make these people stoic. Pain revealed whether stoicism had taken root. What these stories share. These lives differ radically, yet the same pattern appears in all of them. None of these people believed life should have been different. None believed they were owed comfort. None confused what happened to them with who they were. Stoicism did not remove pain from their lives. It removed the belief that pain was evidence of failure. The quiet lesson. Power does not protect against suffering. Poverty does not prevent dignity. Pain does not erase meaning. Stoicism taught people to locate their worth somewhere life could not reach. Not in status. Not in possessions. Not in physical condition. But in character. Character, the Stoics believed, was the one thing fortune could not touch. Why these stories matter at night. At night, when the mind strips away appearances, we are all closer to these Stoic lives than we think. Titles fade. Roles dissolve. Distractions fall silent. What remains is the same question they faced. Can I remain steady inside this life, exactly as it is? Stoicism does not promise an easy yes. It offers a practiced one. There are thoughts the mind avoids during the day. Not because they are rare, but because they are too close. Fear, loss, death. Daylight keeps these thoughts at a distance. Activity distracts. Noise reassures. Plans create the illusion of continuity. But at night, when the world slows and attention turns inward, these thoughts return quietly. Not as panic most of the time. As awareness. Stoicism did not turn away from this awareness. It turned toward it. Not to dwell in darkness, but to remove fear's power. Fear, the Stoics believed, is not born from reality itself. It is born from imagination. The body responds to danger instinctively. That response is natural, but the mind often extends danger beyond what is present. It projects. It anticipates. It rehearses loss long before it arrives. This rehearsal creates suffering in advance. Stoicism noticed that much of what humans fear never happens, and much of what does happen is never as unbearable as imagined. Fear thrives on distance from the present moment. The Stoics approach fear by asking a simple question. What is actually happening right now? Often the answer was disarming. Right now the body is safe. Right now the breath continues. Right now nothing is being lost. Fear dissolves when brought into the present. This was not denial of future difficulty. It was grounding in reality. Death was the fear the Stoics examined most directly. Not because they were obsessed with it, but because it shaped everything else. They lived in a world where death was visible, illness spread quickly, medicine was limited, life expectancy was uncertain. Death was not abstract. And yet, instead of being paralyzed by it, Stoics used it as a lens. They asked, if death is inevitable, how should one live? Stoic reflection on death was not morbid. It was clarifying. Marcus Aurelius wrote about death not to frighten himself, but to remind himself of proportion, of scale, of time. If everything ends, then what deserves fear? If everything passes, then what deserves obsession? Death, when remembered honestly, stripped away trivial concerns. It returned attention to what mattered. The Stoics noticed that fear of death was often fear of losing what one had attached to. Status, possessions, identity, future plans. Death threatened these attachments, not consciousness itself. This insight shifted the question. Instead of fearing death, Stoics examined attachment. What am I holding on to as if it were permanent? What have I mistaken for myself? Letting go became less about death and more about life. The art of letting go, in Stoic thought, was practiced daily. Not only at the end of life. Letting go of praise. Letting go of blame. Letting go of outcomes. Each small release trained the mind. By the time loss arrived, the mind was not unfamiliar with release. This did not remove grief. It prevented collapse. Stoicism did not ask people to imagine death dramatically. It asked them to remember it quietly. Remember that time is limited. That today will not return. That relationships are temporary. This remembrance did not make life grim. It made it precise. When time is seen as finite, presence deepens. Fear also loses its grip when its object is examined. The Stoics asked, what is the worst that can happen? And can I endure it? Often the answer was yes. Humans are more resilient than their fears suggest. Pain passes. Loss is survived. Change is endured. The mind fears what it has not practiced imagining clearly. Stoicism practiced clarity. At night, fear often takes the form of vague unease. A sense that something is wrong. That something bad is coming. Stoicism gently counters this by narrowing focus. What is happening now? What is mine to respond to? What is not? Fear weakens when it loses its imagined future. Letting go in Stoicism is not emotional numbness. It is emotional honesty without clinging. To love knowing loss is possible. To act knowing success is uncertain. To live knowing death is certain. This is not pessimism. It is courage. The Stoics believed that death is not an event to be experienced. It is the absence of experience. This reframing removed much of its terror. Fear, they saw, belongs to the living. And how one lives determines how much fear governs the mind. When the Stoics spoke of dying well, they did not mean dying bravely in a dramatic moment. They meant living in such a way that death did not feel like theft. When nothing essential is tied to what can be taken, nothing essential is lost. Night is the moment when philosophy becomes practical. During the day, Stoicism can feel like an idea. At night, it becomes a necessity. The body finally stops moving, but the mind does not. It reviews the day with relentless attention. Words replay themselves. Decisions resurface. Moments that seemed small return with unexpected weight. This is not because the mind is broken. It is because the mind is unfinished. The Stoics understood this deeply. Many of their reflections were written at night, not as teachings for others, but as medicine for themselves. They did not try to force sleep. They prepared the mind for rest. A Stoic night does not begin in bed. It begins with acknowledgement. The Stoic accepts that the day is over, not emotionally but factually. What was done is done. What was not done belongs to tomorrow or to fate. This acceptance is not passive, It is deliberate. The Stoic asks, what was within my control today? What was not? This single question begins to quiet the mind. Much nighttime unrest comes from misplaced responsibility. The mind continues to work because it believes something is still required of it, something unresolved, something unfinished. Stoicism gently removes this burden. If something was within your control and you acted with sincerity, it is complete. If something was not within your control, it was never yours to carry. This distinction allows the mind to stand down. The Stoics practiced a form of evening reflection, not to judge themselves, but to release the day. They revisited events briefly, without emotion. This happened. I responded this way. Tomorrow I may respond differently. No blame. No self-praise. Just clarity. Once clarity is reached, repetition becomes unnecessary. The mind can rest because it has been heard. One of the Stoics' most powerful nighttime practices was remembering impermanence. Not as fear, as perspective. They reminded themselves that the day they just lived would never return. This was not meant to cause regret. It was meant to close the chapter. When a moment is truly seen as complete, the mind stops reopening it. Stoicism also taught the mind to accept vulnerability at night. During the day, control feels possible. At night, it fades. The Stoic does not resist this. They accept that sleep itself is an act of surrender. You cannot command it. You can only allow it. This acceptance removes pressure. Another Stoic practice was to prepare for the mind's tricks. The Stoics knew that intrusive thoughts would arise. They did not see this as failure. When a thought appeared, they did not chase it. They labeled it gently. This is memory. This is fear. This is imagination. By naming the thought, they separated from it. It could pass without obedience. Stoicism also encouraged reducing the importance of the self at night. Not in a harmful way. In a relieving one. The Stoic reminded themselves, I am a small part of a vast whole. The world does not hinge on my worry. Life continues whether I rest or not. This thought did not diminish life's meaning. It reduced unnecessary tension. Breath was also important, though the Stoics did not formalize breathing techniques as later traditions did. They simply noticed that a calm mind followed a calm body. Slowing the breath was not a technique. It was a consequence of letting go. When the mind stopped fighting the day, the body followed. Perhaps the most important Stoic insight for nighttime rest is this. Peace does not come from resolution. It comes from permission. Permission to stop. Permission to be unfinished. Permission to rest without justification. Stoicism grants this permission. The Stoics did not believe that rest was earned only through productivity. They believed rest was part of nature. Everything rests. Fields lie fallow. Seasons pause. Even the sun disappears each night. Why should the human mind be different? At night, Stoicism asks nothing of you. It does not demand improvement. It does not demand understanding. It does not demand discipline. It asks only awareness. Awareness that the day has passed. Awareness that what matters most cannot be lost overnight. Awareness that rest is not a retreat, but a return. As sleep approaches, Stoic thought becomes quieter. Less reflection. Less questioning. Only presence. The Stoics knew when to stop thinking. They trusted that clarity would return with daylight. If the mind wanders again, Stoicism does not scold it. It gently repeats, this is not mine to solve now. This can wait. I am allowed to rest. And slowly the mind listens. To rest the mind at night, a Stoic does not escape life. They make peace with it. That peace is not dramatic. It is subtle. It is steady. It is enough. Stoicism does not promise comfort. It promises clarity. When the noise fades and the teachings settle, what remains is not a system of rules, but a way of standing within life. Stoicism does not ask you to withdraw from the world or to harden yourself against it. It asks you to meet the world honestly, without illusion, and to govern what is truly yours. This is its quiet power. Over the course of this journey, Stoicism has returned again and again to the same recognition. Life moves according to forces beyond individual control. Change arrives without permission. Loss does not ask for readiness. Fear arises whether invited or not. Stoicism does not argue with these realities. It accepts them. But acceptance in Stoic thought is not surrender. It is alignment. It is the decision to stop wasting energy fighting what cannot be changed, and to direct that energy inward toward character, judgment, and response. This shift alone changes everything. Stoicism teaches that peace is not found in outcomes. Outcomes belong to fortune. Peace is found in how one chooses to respond to whatever arrives. This does not make life easy. It makes it livable. When success comes, the Stoic receives it without arrogance. When failure comes, the Stoic meets it without collapse. Not because they feel nothing, but because they understand what success and failure actually mean. One of Stoicism's most enduring gifts is the dignity it offers. It places worth somewhere life cannot reach. Not in possessions that can be lost. Not in status that can be taken. Not in health that can fail. But in integrity. In acting well, even when circumstances are unkind. In remaining honest, even when outcomes disappoint. In choosing restraint, even when impulse demands reaction. This dignity is quiet but unshakable. Stoicism also leaves us with a refined relationship to fear. Fear no longer rules through imagination alone. It is examined. It is grounded. It is understood. The Stoic does not eliminate fear. They remove its authority. Fear becomes information, not command. Perhaps the most subtle gift Stoicism offers is freedom from constant self-judgment. It reminds us that being human includes error, inconsistency, and vulnerability. Progress is not linear. Mastery is never complete. Stoicism is practiced, forgotten, remembered again. This rhythm is not failure. It is the practice itself. At night when the mind seeks rest, Stoicism offers permission. Permission to stop reviewing what cannot be changed. Permission to release responsibility for what was never yours. Permission to rest without needing justification. The Stoics understood that clarity, once established, does not need constant reinforcement. Rest is not avoidance. It is trust. What Stoicism ultimately leaves in your hands is not certainty. It leaves responsibility. Not responsibility for the world, but for yourself. For how you interpret events. For how you respond to difficulty. For where you place your peace. This responsibility is not heavy. It is liberating. Stoicism does not claim to be the only way to live. It is one response to the same questions humans have always asked in the dark. It answers those questions with steadiness, discipline, and clarity. And when its work is done, it steps back. What remains is a simple posture. Meet life as it is. Act with integrity. Release what is not yours. Rest when the day ends. Nothing more is required. Stoicism does not promise a life without pain. It promises a life that does not collapse under it. And for those seeking quiet strength in a world that never stops moving, that is enough.